My Bible is opened to Judges chapter 20. That will be our text this evening as we continue our study through this writing of our God. Judges chapter 20. I hope that you will open up your Bibles to that text so that we can get into our God's Word together. Once more, it's good that we get to be with one another this evening to praise our God, to sing and to pray to Him, to get into His Word with one another. It's good that we get to be together to do this. As we started off chapter 19 a couple of weeks ago, I shared then that these last three lessons we're breaking down and calling right in our own eyes parts 1, 2, and 3. And so coming into chapter 20, we're looking at being right. And I put wise on the outline. I just completely mistyped there. That should be right in our own eyes. But coming into this chapter here, further, we're going to see some of the outcomes that come when we act in a way that we deem right, we deem correct, we are right in our own eyes, and the things that come from that. In chapter 19, as we looked at this hideous act of Gibeah and the way that they treated these who had come into their town and what they did to this concubine, as we began to look and we see that when we act in a way that's right in our own eyes, the people of God, Israel, become like Sodom, as well as when we act in a way that is right in our own eyes, the proper honoring of our wives, of women, is completely abused so that they are dishonored, so that they are acted against. As we come into chapter 20 here, we'll have some further applications to make as we act in a way that is right in our own eyes. And so with that, you will remember chapter 19 ended with the Levites sending out the body parts of the woman throughout the 12 tribes of Israel to let it be known what had been done to her, and seeking vengeance for her life, that such a hideous thing had occurred. And so as we come into chapter 20, we're going to find Israel assembling to address this. Let's look at the first 3 verses here. Then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. And the chiefs of all the people of all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and the people of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this evil happen?" And so we see that as these body parts of the concubine's body have spread throughout the land, all of the people of Israel are gathering together. Now it is natural inside the text in that parenthetical statement of chapter 3, as the terminology all of the people of Israel is used, we're not talking about the people of Benjamin. Everyone except Benjamin, and we're going to note when we get into chapter 21, there's also another small group of people that have not come here, but the totality of Israel, with the exception of Benjamin, have come together, and they're asking this Levite, "Tell us about this evil that has been committed." And so he begins to tell them about what happened, verse 4. And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, "I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here." I do think that it is a noteworthy thing as you look at the details that he shares here. On the screen, perhaps I use the language incorrectly when I say that he makes a change in detail. It's not necessarily that he changes the details in the sense of what he says there is what happened, but notice how he very carefully words those details. Were the people there to kill him? Probably in the same way that they killed the concubine. Did the people, as he said, they violated his concubine? Absolutely. And she is dead, even as he says. But you notice the part of the story he leaves out where he takes his concubine and puts her outside and says, "You go out there to them." And so he leaves out a pretty key detail of that story that does just happen to make him appear better in the story. But all as he brings this story into the picture form, he doesn't necessarily change anything, but he does leave out a pretty key detail there. But he has brought this to them. He has made the misdeeds, the vile act of those of Gibeah known to the people, and so he's coming to them and he's saying, "What's your counsel? What do you advise we do about this terrible thing that has been done to my concubine?" And so the people say, verse 8, "And all the people arose as one man, saying, None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. And we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people, that when they come, they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage that they have committed in Israel." We need to note a few things here coming out of this verse. Let's notice one. They say, okay, none of us is returning home. None of us is going home in peace after such a vile act has been committed. All of them rise as one man and they say, "We are going to bring justice against Gibeah. For the vile act that they have committed, it is going to be brought against them. We're going to take this multitude of peoples, and retribution is going to be had against Gibeah." And that's noteworthy. We need to see who they say retribution is going to be brought against. We'll bring a little bit of that picture back in when we come to the end of the text. It's not the totality of the picture, but we need that little piece when we get to the last verse. But let's continue on then. They have decided what action is going to be taken against Gibeah, and they make this known to Benjamin. Remember, we read in that parenthetical statement, Benjamin knows about this group having gathered together. Benjamin knows that this is going on, and so they're going to send word throughout Benjamin, and Benjamin is going to refuse to condemn Gibeah, to justly condemn them, verse 11. "So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. And the tribes of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, What evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel." Word is sent throughout the tribe of Benjamin to these various cities. What are you guys thinking? That this evil would exist, that this terrible thing would happen. And so you give up these men. You put these men to justice so that they can be punished for this terrible thing that they have done. And what we would expect is for Benjamin to say, "Absolutely. You're right. This was a terrible thing, and these men deserve punishment." But it's not what they do, the remainder of verse 13. "But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. We would hope that they say, "You're right, they deserve justice." But instead, they say, "Absolutely not. And if you want to force the issue, let's go to war." They muster up as many people as they can, as many men of arms as they can, so that they can battle their brothers. Did you notice that the text pointed that out explicitly? As it talks about the rest of Israel coming against them, who are they going to battle against? Their brothers. Those whom they should have stood beside, those whom they should have recognized as administering some justice here, because what Gibeah did was an entire vile abomination. And they say, "Absolutely not. Let's go to war." Then, as you compare verse 15, which we read, to verse 17, we're given numbers. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. And so as you take verse 15, where you learn that all of the other Benjaminites had gathered up 26,000, as well as those of Gibeah who had gathered up the 700, those who were left-handed and could sling the sling. So Benjamin has these 26,700 men, and the remainder of Israel coming against them has 400,000 men. I do think that this disparity of number is going to become significant to some of the thoughts that are addressed in the next section for us to think about. So let's carry this into verse 18. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, "Who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin?" And the Lord said, "Judah shall go up first." Then the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. This is an interesting beginning to the story. As you read through it, this really isn't what I expect to happen here. And I would imagine it's not what you expect to happen here either. Israel goes to God. All of these men who are coming to administer justice, they go to God and they say, "Who needs to go up first? How do we handle this battle?" And God answers them. God tells them, "Judah goes up first." And having received such an answer, I think what we expect to happen is they're victorious. They come in and they wipe out Gibeah. But it's not what happened. They come in on this first day of battle, and 22,000 of them die. That's not what we expect to happen. Or maybe I should say, that's not what I expect to happen. But let's continue on, verse 22. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. And the people of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until the evening, and they inquired of the Lord, "Shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin?" And the Lord said, "Go up against them." So the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All these were men who drew the sword. Continue on in the story, and it goes once more in an unexpected way. You expect, okay, second day they're going to go out, and God tells them to go. They've asked, "Should we go?" And God says, "Go." And so you expect going to be entirely victorious. And it doesn't happen that way again. This time, 18,000 of them are destroyed. And so we come to the end of this day, and they start asking God again if they should go up. Verse 26. Then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, Shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, Go up. For tomorrow I will give them into your hand. So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah. Come to God once more. Should we go up again? Or should we stop? God says, Go up again. Tomorrow I am going to give you the victory. I think in the point that I have emphasized several times here, there's a big question mark in my mind. Why did these first two instances go this way? Why were they not immediately given the victory? In reading some, there was a commentator, I think, who helped me to understand what is going on here. And I want to share that with you because I do think that this is it creates a big why in our minds. You'll notice who he talks about inquiring of God here. It's Phinehas, the son of Aaron. And so what this is going to do is this is going to take us back in time. This is placed at the end of Judges, but it's not placed chronologically inside of Judges. This is put into the time in which Israel is pressing into the land shortly after the death of Joshua. And you will remember two things about that. You will remember, one, the people's inability to drive the inhabitants out of the land. And we answered that question back then saying, why? Why were they unable to drive the people out of the land? And the text explicitly says, well, they had chariots of iron. Well, when we look back there, I know the beginning of Judges was a long time ago, but when we look back there, we know that it wasn't because of their weaponry that they couldn't drive out the people of the land. It was because they refused to submit themselves to God. They refused to be totally devoted to God and do what God had given them to do. And they allowed the people to remain in the land. And they began to make covenants with them and have relationships with them. And they were unable to drive the people out of the land due to their refusal to submit themselves to God. And so although in this text you do have a group of people who are bringing about justice for those who have committed a vile act, you also have a group of people who are living in a time period that they have not completely submitted themselves to God, and so they are learning about submission to God. But let's also point this out secondly. As you put that into the context of their refusal to drive out the peoples of the land, do you notice who they're not refusing to drive out? You notice who they're quite happy to work against again and again and again until they get the results they want? Their brothers, the Benjaminites. Says, we're going to drive them out. We're going to bring justice to them. They don't have a problem with that. But driving out the people of the land? Apparently they have a problem with that because they don't submit themselves to God in this. And so God takes this as an opportunity. Yes, judgment is being brought against the Benjaminites for their vile act. Gibeah for doing it. Benjamin for not giving themselves over to the proper justice, that he is using this to bring justice to them, as well as to teach the other Israelites, you submit yourself to me, and I will give you the victory. And they do continue to submit to him in this text, and we are going to see that Benjamin is utterly defeated, verse 29. So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah, and the people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the third day and set themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. And the people of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city. And as at other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah, and in the open country about 30 men of Israel. And the people of Benjamin said, They are routed before us as at the first. But the people of Israel said, Let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the people of Israel who were in ambush rushed out of their place from Margiba. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and the battle was hard, but the Benjaminites did not know that disaster was upon them. And the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. And so here what you see being set forth in this part of the text is, God has told them, tomorrow I'm going to give you the victory. And so they set up this ambush, and we can talk about all the pictures that's used of their drawing out the Benjaminites and getting into military tactics here. Some of the next verses get into that in a little greater detail, but that doesn't, to get into that really misses the point. The point is, God told them, I'm going to give you the victory. And so then you come into verse 35, and that's the picture. God defeats these Benjaminites. The Lord brings justice against them. And the reason I say some of what I say here in this section, that this big picture is painted for us in these verses, and the next section then comes in and gives greater detail. There are some who would approach this and they're reading it in a very chronological way, and they start pointing here and saying there's a contradiction, because here in verse 35 it talks about their being defeated and this many thousand of them dying, but you come next in verse or two, and there's Benjamin, there's Gibeah, thinking they're going to be victorious. And so these details just aren't working very well together. There's some contradiction that occurs there. What we have happening here is something that I pointed out in our Jonah study. It's very typical of Hebrew writing, where you get a big picture ideal. They tell you, this is what happened. Now let me go back and give you some of the details that occurred inside of this defeat. And so when greater detail is given, verse 36, so the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted the men in ambush whom they had set against Gibeah. Then the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in the main ambush was that when they had made a great cloud of smoke rise up out of the city, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, surely they are defeated before us as in the first battle. But when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and behold, the whole city went up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw that disaster was close upon them. And so we're getting a greater picture of this defeat that is administered to them. They think they're continuing to chase Israel. They think this is going just like the first battle. We're going to go and we're going to wipe out thousands of them again. Then the signal starts rising up, and they've been ambushed, and all of Israel is turning with their greater force, and they say, uh-oh, caught in the trap, and they see that they are going to be defeated. At this point, they know that disaster is upon them. And verse 35 sums it up, and all who were defeated there and all that the Lord destroyed. But that continues on in the text, talking about all who are utterly destroyed. Verse 42. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them. And those who came out of the cities were destroying them in their midst. Surrounding the Benjaminites, they pursued them and trod them down from Nohah as far as opposite Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them men of valor, and they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 men of them were cut down in the highways, and they were pursued hard to get them, and 2,000 men of them were struck down. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men who drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. They're utterly destroyed. Of the thousands that they have gathered, 600 of them escaped destruction as vengeance, proper vengeance, as justice by the hand of God is brought against this group of people who, one, are defending those who committed the vile act, and two, those who have committed the vile act. That justice is brought against them. But then we come to verse 48. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men and beasts, and all that they found, and all the towns they found, they set on fire. I think the New American Standard captures the picture here better than the ESV about who is being addressed inside of this verse, who the men of Israel are turning against as they have turned back from the pursuit of these men and now are going through the area, striking them with the edge of the sword, both the entire city with the cattle and all that they found. Now, in the usage of that terminology, man, one commentator says what is being brought out in this of man to cattle, as in everything that falls between man and cattle, man, women, children, you name it, from man to cattle, they are all being wiped out. And that's why I like the New American Standard. It helps to bring out that in its entirety, and there's justification for that coming into the terminology entire, where it's the word for man here is the concept of wholesome, the concept of something in its entirety. And so the New American Standard does well to say what they're coming through and they're wiping out everything. And you notice what they do to every city that they find. They burn all of them down. They are not leaving anything behind as they go through the cities, killing everyone and everything in it, all the way from man to cattle, and every city is being burned down. Now in chapter 21, they're going to regret this. In chapter 21, they're going to look at this action and say, man, Benjamin's dead. Benjamin cannot survive anymore. Verse 48, I think we're seeing we move from justice to genocide. As they are going in, you remember who they started off bringing justice against. That's why I pointed it out when we were there in the text, that they've come together in this assembly and they said, Gibeah has acted vilely here. Justice needs to be brought against Gibeah. They make that known to Benjamin. I recognize this. And Benjamin says, no, we're going to protect our own. And so I recognize as well that that's only a piece of the puzzle. Now justice needs to be expanded. As Benjamin is protecting their own, those who would act in such a way for those who have acted so vilely, justice is brought against them. But the question has to be asked, has the whole city done this? Has every woman in the city, as they're going through and wiping out entire cities, have they done this? And we can say this with certainty. You can guess that I'm making conjecture in verse 48 that that's what the terminology entire from man to cattle means. But you come into chapter 21, and what you're going to notice is they say, we don't have enough women for the Benjaminites to continue. All of their women have been wiped out. They're not just killing the guilty men here. They're coming through and they're wiping out entire cities. Where instead of properly administering justice and stopping where the line is proper, no, let's just go through and wipe everything out. And every city that we come to, let's raze it. Let's burn it to the ground. And so as we take this story, let's begin to make some application with it as far as what happens when we do what is right in our own eyes. Let's see in Benjamin that when we do what's right in our own eyes, we, quote unquote, we protect our own before administering justice. What did Benjamin do? They should have come in and they should have said, you're right, what they did was vile. What they did deserves death. Their actions deserve justice administered to it. But they were doing what was right in their own eyes. And what's right in their own eyes? Well, it's certainly not allowing proper justice to be administered. It's saying, let's go to war. You want to bring punishment against them, you're going to have to go through me first. And we can be guilty of that. When we do what's right in our own eyes, we might say something along the lines of family before anything else. You know what? We share a last name, and I don't care that you did something wrong. I don't care that you acted in a vile way. We're family, and so you're safe with me. I'm not talking to the cops. You can trust me. We're family. I'm going to protect my own before allowing justice to be administered. As we think about, and I introduced it this way when I said that we're going to see the application of when we act in a way that's right in our own eyes as being particularly applicable to our culture today. I want you to think about race. We can look at one who shares our skin color and we can say, I'm going to stand by them, right or wrong. We got this in common. We have this togetherness here. And because we have this, I'm not going to give this up, even when they are wrong. I'm not going to condemn that, even when they are wrong. Don't you see in the text, that's what Benjamin was guilty of. They said, these are Benjaminites. These are people of Benjamin, and we're not going to turn them over. I don't care if what they did was wrong. And that's what we do when we act in a way that's right in our own eyes. Because in our own eyes, that we have in common is more significant, is greater than the judgment of God, than his justice. Secondly, and we're going to connect the verses of the second point to this previous point. That's why I don't have a verse there. But secondly, when we do what is right in our own eyes, we can think that we're mighty. We can think that we are great. We can think that we're going to be victorious time and time and time again, because as far as we can tell from our history, we look back and every time we've been victorious. And so what's different about this time? When we do what's right in our own eyes, we think that we are victorious when God has promised, you will be defeated. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 5 here. Isaiah 5, and this is where I come up with some of the wise in our own eyes terminology, put the wrong language on the outline there. But let's look at Isaiah 5 and verse 20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Here's people who think they're wise. Here's people who think that they have it all figured out. As we connect it back to that first point, what do we have figured out? Well, this is my own. We have this in common. This is light. And for anything to be done to them, or for me to allow anything to be done to them, that is darkness. And you see the woe pronounced in verse 20. Woe to those who call good evil and evil good, light dark and dark light. Because that's exactly what's going on in that situation. And they think that they are so wise in doing so. We think we are so wise in doing so. And you look at the declaration that God has made. God has declared in wisdom. You can think that if you want. Tell you what, you can call light dark and dark light. I will let you do that. But woe to you if you do it. You can think that you are wise. I'll let you do that. But woe to you if you do it. And woe has been pronounced upon us. God has made his declaration and made it clearly about those who are going to be defeated by him, who are going to stand as recipients of his wrath. And we can stand and we can say, but I made it through today. Where's God at now? We can be the scoffers of 2 Peter chapter 3. Look, the world is continuing the way it's always continued. What do you mean it's going to be destroyed? I was victorious today. And what happens when we get to the third day? What happens when we get to the battle that God says, this is it. The lesson has been taught, and you refuse to learn it. You are going to be destroyed. But when we do what's right in our own eyes, we think that we're victorious, even though God has promised our defeat. And finally, when we do what's right in our own eyes, quote unquote justice, it does start off as justice. I use that terminology several times throughout the text. It does start off as justice. But when we do what is right in our own eyes, rather than what is right in the eyes of the righteous king, quote unquote justice becomes retribution that is not finished, that is not complete until we are satisfied. That's a part of it being right in our own eyes. I am going to come against you until there is nothing left to come against. I'm going to completely wipe you out. Because that's what justice demands. And when that comes from God, justice demands that. But when it comes from us doing what is right in our own eyes, that's no longer justice. That's vengeance. That's seeking retribution personally for what has been done. Let's pick up a final passage here. We're going to look in Matthew 5. We talked about this in the Sermon on the Mount, but I want to bring this point to remembrance in connection to our seeing this in Judges. Matthew 5, we're going to begin in verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Pause there for just a moment. We pointed this out in our study, but we need to recognize it. An accurate quotation from the law. You can go into the law and you can read about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But as you recognize inside of this section, Jesus is pointing out the misuse, the misteaching, the false teaching that is occurring here before he offers correction. That you've heard it said an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. And so as they are misusing this, what are they misusing it to say? They're misusing it for personal vengeance. They're misusing it for you took my eye, and so in vengeance, I'm going to take your eye. Because what did God mean when he said it? He says, here's the limit. He says, if someone does this terrible thing to you, you are not allowed. There's a saying you may be familiar with: don't get even, get ahead. That's not your way of living. That you're not allowed to go above and beyond in the administering of justice. That is a misapplication of the text, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Justice is about things being made right, not you getting ahead. And they, in this day, they were misusing that phrasing to teach personal vengeance. And so what does Jesus say? But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Personal vengeance has no part in you. In fact, you are totally sacrificing personal vengeance for sacrifice, for difficulty, for hardship, that when one would come to you and treat you in a way that you want to have your vengeance, you give them more. When we act like Israel acted in verse 48, that story did start off injustice, with justice, not injustice as in without justice. That here they were coming to a group of people who acted vilely, and God tells them, go, I'm going to give you the victory. And those peoples are destroyed. And the peoples who defended them are destroyed. And justice is administered. But then Israel said, we're going to go through and we're just going to wipe them out. Innocent, guilty, doesn't matter. Wipe them out. It started off justice. And I have no doubt in verse 48 they said, justice. That we are administering what's right and good here. But it became retribution. It became a taking of personal vengeance that wasn't completed until their appetites were satisfied. And that's what happens when we do what is right in our own eyes. We see that in our culture today. I think about some of the actions in big cities who do see gang warfare, so that when one of their members is killed, they have to kill 2 of the rival members. When one of their family members is killed, they have to wipe out the entire family of the other. And it escalates and it escalates and it escalates until you see what you see on the news about these big cities who have lots of this kind of activity. And when you have someone who's doing what's right in their own eyes, that's exactly what it looks like. And we see that so prevalent in our culture of a peoples, ourselves included, who need not do what is right in our own eyes, but what is right in the eyes of the righteous King. With that, we will bring things to a close this evening, and we will ask the question that we have asked previously, working from this title. How are you living life? By your wisdom? By what is right in your own eyes? Or is it in submission to the King? Are you living life according to our God, or is it according to self? You might say, I'm not killing anyone, so it's not that bad. But if you are living life, doing what is right in your own eyes, it still looks exactly like this. Maybe not in the degree that we would place it, but it still looks exactly like this. And if that describes you, you need to repent this evening. If there's anything at all that we can do to help you in your walk with God, won't you come while we stand and sing the song selected?